Welcome to lesson D-16. There are many ways that a robot's motion can be controlled, like a joystick, push-button switches, or keyboard input. Another option for controlling a robot is to use a web page hosted locally on the robot. In this lesson, you'll create a web page to control the motion of your robot, and this web page will be hosted by the Apache server that was installed as part of the RPi Cam Web Interface software that was used to stream camera video to a web page back in Level C. The web page will be used to trigger multiple Cgi scripts that will control the left and right motors and their speed. The steps used to accomplish this task will be similar to those in lesson C16, where you learn to control the color of an RGB LED with a web page. There will also be some review in this lesson related to concepts covered in that previous lesson. In this video, we'll walk through a review of Cgi Scripting and then move on to working with Div Tags, JavaScript, on-pointer-up events, and button functionality. The web page that you'll create will use the HTML scripting language. Images of direction arrows will be downloaded from our GitHub repository, and they will be used to create buttons on the page. When any of these buttons is clicked, a Cgi script will be called that will drive the motors in the appropriate direction for that button. Here's a table that lists the location of some of the files that will be used for the web page. Any HTML files located in the /var/www directory will be hosted by the Apache server on the Pi and can be accessed by using the IP address of the Pi. Cgi scripts will be used to run wiring Pi commands that will adjust PWM motor speeds and drive the motors as required for forward, reverse, left, and right turns. To change the mode of a pin to an output, PWM, or back to an input, we'll use the code you see here in this first box. Once it's configured as an output, we can use the command in the second box to drive the pin high or low. For PWM pins that need to have the duty cycle adjusted to control motor speed, we can use the command you see here. For more information and examples on each of these commands, you can refer back to the section titled Controlling GPIO Pins with a Wiring Pi back in lesson C5. You may remember that newly created Cgi scripts won't be executable. They will need to be made executable by running the chmod command on the file to add the +x attribute like you see in this first box. If you're already in the directory containing the Cgi script you'd like to modify, then you can remove the path from the file name like you see here in the second box. This method will be used to make any Cgi scripts that we create throughout the lesson executable. The web page you'll build for controlling the robot will be very similar to the RGB LED control page that you built previously. There are a few new concepts you haven't seen before that will be used to build this page, and these new concepts are HTML div containers and JavaScript on-pointer-up functionality. Okay, so let's start with div tags. The RGB LED control page that you built previously used a series of links down the left side of the page. This formatting, where they're all pushed to the far right, is the default display method used for web pages, so it's very easy to create this type of page with very little code. However, this layout doesn't work well for everything. We will be using 5 buttons for controlling the robot, and this is how they would look if stacked down the left side of the page. This layout will technically work, but it could be made a lot more user-friendly by arranging the buttons more logically based on their direction. So let's look at how we use div tags to create this more visually pleasing and user-friendly layout like you see on the right. The better layout can be made by enclosing the heading and buttons in div tags. Div tags will create a division or section on the page that can apply styling to any element inside the div. This div styling can be used for many things, but the example that we just saw applies a style called text-align:center to center everything inside the div. The HTML code to accomplish this layout will look something like you see here. Let's take a moment and look more closely at this code. The open div tag is used to set the alignment style for any elements in the div container there on the second line, and this will apply to the robot controls heading and all of the button images below. The heading will be displayed on its own line, And then next, the forward image button will be displayed and a break tag is used to create a new line. The left, stop, and right button images are centered together on the next line, and a break tag is again used to create a new line. The reverse button image is displayed and the closing div tag is used to close the div container. Without the break tags being used to create new lines, all of the button images would be centered below the heading on the same line. Next, let's look at the other type of web page element we'll be using, Java on-pointer-up events. In the previous RGB LED control program, we used only the JavaScript event named onPointerDown that called a function when a link was clicked. This worked to change the color of the LED as soon as the link was clicked. With the direction controls for the robot, it will also be helpful to assign another event to each button that will call a function when the button is released. This will allow you to click and hold down on a button to keep going that direction and then release the click when you would like to stop the robot. This will be accomplished by assigning both an on-pointer-down event and an on-pointer-up event to the button. So this button will have these characteristics. So first, the file named forward.jpg will be used as the image for the button. The function named forward will be called when the button is pressed. The function named stop will be called when the button is released. The functions named forward and stopped referenced by this button will need to be created earlier in the program to call the appropriate CGI scripts to control motor movements. Okay, let's move on and look at the button functionality for the web page. Now, you may remember from previous lessons related to wiring Pi, the GPIO pins are inputs by default. They must be configured as outputs or PWM before they can be used as either an output that will be driven high or low, or as a PWM output. Here are the GPIO pins that'll need to be configured before they can be used to drive the robot, like you see here. So we have the right motor pins and how they're configured, and then we have the left motor pins and how they're configured. This web page will have CGI files for forward, reverse, left, right, and stop that could be used to configure these pins. And we could include the pin configuration code in each file, but that would add 6 lines of code to each file in addition to the lines required for driving the motors. The direction arrow buttons will be configured to run the stop function whenever they are released, calling the stop.cgi script. We can save some code in the direction CGI files by only including the pin setup information in the stop.cgi file. The pins will be configured every time the stop button is pressed or any of the direction buttons are released. This means that there will be 2 ways to get the GPIO pins configured when you first open the web page. The first is to press the stop button and the pins will be configured and ready to drive the robot. The other option is to press and release a direction button. The first press will be ignored since the pins are not yet configured, but the release will run the stop.cgi script that will configure the pins. Subsequent presses of any direction buttons will result in movement of the robot. Okay, before you move on to the activities for this lesson, let's take a few moments to go over what we just discussed. The web page you'll create and the activities for this lesson will use HTML scripting language as well as CGI script for when the buttons are clicked. We reviewed CGI script commands from lesson C5, including how to change the mode of a pin, driving a pin high or low, adjusting the duty cycle, and enabling newly created scripts to be executable. And a quick reminder, you can really easily go back and watch that video from lesson C5 again. We then looked at 2 web page elements that you'll be using. And the first was Div Tags, which create a division or section of the page that we can apply styles to. This allows us to have a nice user-friendly layout. Then we looked at JavaScript on-pointer-up events. You'll use these along with the on-pointer-down events you worked with previously to control the button functionality. The buttons on the web page will use scripts and functions to control the direction the robot drives. Okay, go ahead and move on to the activities where you'll build a web page.